Hello, and welcome to AW360 Live, part of Advertising Week. We are here to talk about, I'm going to look at this camera. We're going to here to talk about gender equality, and to get us started, we have remotely from London, we have Meabh Quorin, the Managing Director of the Foresight Factory, here to tell us a little bit about a recent study they did, and then when we come back, we will have a live panel with some guests here in the studio.
Hi everyone, delighted to be talking to you today about a study we've conducted on gender diversity. This is courtesy of some work that we've been doing with Advertising Week. We'll be revealing the full highlights of this study at the conference live on September 26th. But let me kick off. I'm the CEO of the Foresight Factory. We're a global trends firm, and we are always trying to dig into the heart of the issue. So I want to start our discussion before we turn to the panel in New York today on why we even need to still be talking about gender diversity. Why have we still got such a live issue here? I think there are some really simple truths we should start with. The pay gap still exists. It is closing. We have made some progress here. There is, in so many more firms, equal pay for equal jobs. But it is fair to say that most of this effort has been concentrated on entry-level positions, and particularly for women. As they move through the organization, what happens is a lag opens up, particularly on a return to work from having had children. And promotion into senior roles starts to slow, and that's where the pay gap really comes into its own. Not enough women are going far enough in enough organizations for that to stop. And looking at current trends, it looks like that will continue for quite some time to come. I think another quick issue worth mentioning is the fact that feminism is still often perceived as a non-issue, or maybe even just a branding issue. It's not taken seriously enough as a problem. And actually, this is getting to the heart of what our study found. What we see is there is an enormous difference in perception around what gender diversity actually is and needs to be about. Men and women just don't have the same attitudes when it comes to understanding the issue. What's remarkable is that our ambitions in the workplace are exactly the same. Both men and women are aiming for powerful roles, progression through a business, but almost without exception, women don't feel like they can ever aim for the top job. So the issue really gets into the heart of changing company cultures so that women feel they have access to progress. I think it's worth dwelling on the story at large is that men just don't see this as an issue. What we find when we talked to people is that it was not really registering as something to concentrate on. It was at worst a non-issue, at best something that just wasn't top of mind. And we talked to 285 well-placed executives right across the media, creative advertising, marketing industries in the USA, both men and women alike. So we could really see this playing out with men. Women, on the other hand, had absolute confidence in themselves, just like men. They felt that they shared the same skill sets as men. Obviously, different approach sometimes in the workplace, but really the stopping block was always coming back to company culture. Some other stumbling blocks that I think the panel will talk about today, and that certainly will continue to form the debate, center around two things. First, role models. What we found in the study is that while young men in particular, are getting lots of inspiration, finding it easy to access role models, young women are not. A third of young women really struggling to find any pointers to get them started, get them moving in their company. Even bigger issue is actual discrimination. As many as 40% of the women in our study had actually experienced discrimination. Arguably even more worryingly, it was as many as 1 in 4 young women aged between 18 and 29 barely started in the workplace and they had already experienced discrimination. This was almost unheard of in our male sample. And really a big issue around the fact that it was gender discrimination far more so than any other kind of discrimination that we asked them about. So those are some issues that we're going to be grappling with. I think we should look to the future and some of the strategies that could be explored. We were really fascinated to see that in the US, people looking to the UK, looking to Scandinavia to explore some bolder strategies. And what's refreshing is that there was some really high support for that across both men and women. Certainly a majority of people suggesting that things like gender quotas should absolutely be explored as an option. But of course, there are many other bold strategies being tested out there in the marketplace. We're going to be debating some of those today. And as I said, we'll be debating even more of them when we get to Advertising Week on New York on Monday 26th. And I hope to see many of you join us for the discussion for the rest of today and again later in the month. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Meabh, for that. Now joining me live right now, we have Marie-Claire Barker, the Global Chief Talent Officer for NBC, and Shelley Zallis, the CEO of Female Quotient and the creator of the Girls Lounge. So thank you both for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So feeding off of what Meabh said, and also Marie-Claire, you and I had a conversation earlier. There are obviously a lot of topics we can go on to. There's a lot of tangents we can take, so I'm very passionate. So we'll try to keep it focused as much as we can. But I guess the big question is coming out of the Foresight Factory's findings and even just the Olympic Games, where unfortunately gender inequality was very much on display. Why are we still having this conversation in 2016?
Well, I mean, I think we're having the conversation because nothing's changed quickly enough. It's just moving very, very slowly. And I think when you think about the conversation that's happening now, it's really quite an exciting time because the conversation's different. We're not just talking about how many women are represented in a corporate level, we're talking about behavior. And when you think about the Olympics itself, it's a classic example of how women are being talked about and the labels that are being put on them and how they're being represented. And I think that's where the conversation needs to shift. And we need to think about the biases that people have in terms of how people are represented. Another example would be, this year PricewaterhouseCoopers sent a temporary worker home because she was wearing flat shoes. Now, was her work going to be any better if she was 2 inches taller? I don't think so. But social media took hold of that and ran with it, and it went viral, and it was everywhere. So I think the conversation is getting bigger, and it's shifting, and it's becoming a different conversation.
I think it's also, we just keep admiring the problem. And I think we have to stop, we all acknowledge that there is an issue. We have to stop talking about the issue and starting to create solutions for change. And one of the things that was really amazing about the Olympics was this whole concept of the shine theory, women supporting women. And I think it was a really big topic. And I think that's also a big transformation for us in the corporate world. All of us supporting one another, we share similar challenges. And how do we move the needle? And we have to stop talking about what is happening, but also what the opportunity is. Gender equality is not a nice to have, it's also a need to have. And when you look at the power of what could happen when we create equality in the workplace, we have an opportunity to contribute over $12 trillion to the GDP by 2025. So what are we waiting for?
Do you think part of it has to do with clarifying the terms in a way? Because people say diversity, they say inclusion, almost like they're the same thing. But in fact, diversity is, okay, you hire a few people. Inclusion is you create an environment where those people can succeed. Are we just putting our focus on the wrong one, do you feel?
Well, I think our industry has focused very much on the diversity angle, and what it's done is it's put metrics in place of how many people you're hiring, and it's targeted. I think it's targeted the wrong issue. What needs to happen is the brave conversation, and I'm going to use the word bias again. It's about when people are making those decisions, what filters are they putting in front of them? Because everybody has bias. Let's be honest. You can't hide from that. But it's how do we help the people within our environment and our organizations deal with that bias? How are they making those decisions? So. I do think the conversation needs to shift away from diversity and inclusion, and it really needs to be, well, what does this look like in our environment? We're looking for variety in our thinking and in our work, and we'll only get that if we have different people in our organization.
I think when you think about diversity, for me, diversity is not about gender, race, or age. It's about skill set, thought, mindset. And to achieve that, we have to also start showcasing the successes of diversity in the workplace and the power of that. We always say if we were all the same, we're not necessary. So I think we have to start celebrating our differences and how they complement skill sets at the table. And also, you know, we break gender equality into buckets because it's two words that are big and messy. You know, we take it to wage gap. You know, it should be equal pay for equal work. I mean, let's get over ourselves. Why are women paid 79 cents on the dollar? We sensationalize it by, you know, selling chocolate for $1 to men and 79 cents for women, just to say this is a silly conversation. Then we talk about the unconscious bias, and I say let's be conscious of our unconscious. We all have unconscious bias in certain regards, but if we do bring those biases to the table, then we will be attracting the available talent versus recruiting the best. And then culture. How do we create a culture of care? If we want to retain the best talent and get past what we say the messy middle, that's where we have a real issue with women falling out, we better create a culture of care. One with flexibility, one with, you know, parental leave, not just maternity leave, and create visibility for organizations that are moving forward and showing progress. And, you know, visibility for women achieving great success and what they bring to the table. And once we start doing that, I think we can start elevating this conversation to action.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, do you feel that it's a generational problem? Do you think that, for lack of a better word, that old school mentality is aging out, or do you think it's still perpetuating, like even with new blood coming into the agencies and to other media and things like that?
I mean, I think unfortunately we have legacy issues inside of our organizations and a lot of textbook solutions, which in today's modern day and age just don't work. Throw out the textbook. It ain't on a checklist. And let's, you know, create a new lexicon so we start moving forward with a new, you know, mantra and philosophy. And, you know, if you really think about cultures today and technology today that are such great enablers, I mean, Mark Benioff from Salesforce, it's the one button push. Push the button, see where the inequality is and fix the damn problem and move forward. You know, and so I think that a lot of it is legacy issue, and a lot of the rule book was created by, you know, the traditional, you know, standards, and it's time to open up the conversation and not be afraid. We should be brave and take that next step of what we need to do to create new environments and, you know, uplift everyone so this next generation doesn't inherit the same problems that we're struggling with.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I've been in this industry a number of years, and the conversations you have are quite, you know, can be quite different depending on the generation. But I think the biggest difference I find is that people coming into our industry now are looking for an experience. So they're not necessarily looking at that traditional career that other people in the industry have had. So there's a bit of a disconnect when you're talking to a hiring manager that might have been in the industry for years, and you say, well, what is it you're looking for? And it'll be, well, I want a me 15 years ago. So it's okay, so you want another white bloke, that's what you're saying. So you 15 years ago is a younger white bloke. And so you're not having those conversations now, but I think, yes, the generational thing does have an impact. Is it everything? It's not everything, but it does have an impact.
Yeah.
Well, I think technology really is a game changer for culture today if we embrace it and use it with flex schedules and, you know, really being able to accommodate, you know, all people to get into the entry level and rise to the top, because that's where we're finding the biggest problem is, you know, women falling out, what I call the messy middle in middle management, because it's the opt-in, opt-out, you know, challenges in their life. And, you know, how do we push them to the top but adjust accordingly? And also men in the messy middle, how do we coach and train them to support and rise, you know, get women to rise to the top as well?
And there's also, just building on that, Shelley, it's people aren't just opting out because there's that association with I have a family and I need that balance. Too many people assume that that's the reason people are opting out. There could be a whole number of reasons, and I just think that, again, it's about really understanding what the fundamental issue is as to why people are opting out and addressing it at the core.
Do you think that there needs to be sort of across the board redefinition of family? Do you think family impacts men and women differently in the workplace? People just see it as primarily a woman's issue and not something that men are necessarily responsible for, and that may lead to some of the imbalance because there's that feeling of, well, eventually a woman is just going to leave and start her family, whereas you don't really see that with men.
No, and I think, I mean, I can talk personally about this one because, you know, I'm very fortunate. I travel an awful lot with my role. I wouldn't be able to do my role if my husband wasn't staying at home and looking after our child. And I think society and culture in general doesn't support that model because it's not what people are used to. They're used to me being at home and him being at work. And it creates challenges because, you know, thank God we have a strong supportive relationship because, you know, there'll be questions like, well, when are you going to go out and get a job? And when can Mary Claire stay home and look after the, you know, Jack? And that's not what it's about. It's about, as a family, we have chosen this route. And we need, you know, and corporations and society should actually support people in that and not make it difficult for people because people are playing different roles now. And that's the thing with gender. You know, it's not just this is the role that one gender should play. Roles are becoming very blended.
You know, we've been calling it the flipping point, and I think it is an opportunity today to redefine the traditional mother-father responsibility to more partner, parental, where we share equally. I think, and it starts at home, and I think that responsibilities start at home, and I think that that's a really important, you know, conversation. Gender equality is not a female issue. It is a social and economic issue, period. And once we start understanding that and showcasing the dynamics of the power that that brings to corporations, I think we'll start moving that needle. Instead of going backwards, we'll start seeing some progress moving forwards.
You mentioned flexibility as well, which is probably helpful if utilized correctly because I feel like a lot more industries now are more flexible. People are working remotely. People are working from home a few days a week. You have this flexibility that you didn't have, you know, 20, 30 years ago. Is there disappointment though that isn't propelling equality forward as much as maybe you would think it would? Because roles are changing a little bit?
And I think, again, that goes back to the behavioral piece because you can put as many policies in place as you want. But until organizations lift that guilt that says, you know, as a working mother, I am going to leave at 4 because I do have other commitments, or, you know, as a young male that has you know, he might have an interest outside of work, he might have a sporting event he wants to get to. You know, how do we use that flexibility? It's about how do you lift that guilt? And to me, it's behavioral. It's about how do we, you know, build a culture that's going to allow people that flexibility.
Yeah, I think if you think about creating a culture of taking care of your own, really looking inside of your organization and saying, how can I create a company culture that will be the best that it can be, attracting, retaining the best talent based on passion, purpose. You know, the next generation, our future leaders, our millennials, we call them the next generation. They're the now generation. They're the purpose generation. They have purpose in their DNA. They want to work for companies that do the right thing, make the world a better place, and care. And so if that's not enough to say it's time to change some policies and create accountability around it. You know, we all sort of default to, I've got the chief diversity officer, check. You know, I'm going to fill a quota, check. We need to move beyond that. That might be starting points, but then you got to live and breathe and understand the implications of the changes you're making, the power behind it, the progress that you're making, and share that and create accountability so that you actually know you're making progress and moving forward.
Now, we are potentially on the cusp of the first female president. We'll see what happens in November. But do you foresee that being a force for change? Do you think things will change in the next 4 years under President Clinton? Or how do you sort of, I know it's still speculative at this point, but do you see a potential for a push forward?
Well, I think if you look at Davos, they said, what was it? They said that, you know, we won't see gender equality for the next 100 years. So, you know, she's going to have some heavy lifting to do if she's going to do anything in 4 years. But I'd like to tell you a story about, because obviously I'm not from the US, and I was learning about the presidents with my son. And we were going through them all, and we had all the presidents laid out, and, you know, ending with President Obama. And I said to my son, I said, what's wrong with this picture? When you look at all these presidents, what's wrong? And he looked at it and he said, well, only one is black. Because in his head, he didn't think that there would be a woman in that equation, because the role has always been occupied by a man. So if nothing else, November may show people that actually, you know, it's not exclusively a male role.
I think that just because Hillary is a woman doesn't mean by natural association, you know, things will change. But I hope that we tap into. We talk about the masculine and feminine archetypes of leadership. Feminine archetypes of leadership: collaborative, nurturing, empathetic, passionate. I hope she taps into that and realizes that equality is something that we need to work on, and that within the first 180 days, it becomes, you know, an equality incentive program that we incentivize corporations to do the right thing. And hopefully the behavior will then force them to look back and say, wow, I'm so glad I did that. But we need that little push. Yeah. And, you know, Davos did bring that up, the World Economic Forum, that it will take, you know, over 100 years if we keep doing what we're doing, which is nothing. So unless we create toolkits with a step change so that we don't scare ourselves, you know, to keep going backwards, you know, we really need to take this step change and mark our progress along our journey. So when we look back, we say, wow, look how far we've come, versus look how far we have to go.
And it's going back to what you said about accountability. No one's actually being held accountable for it right now.
And the second we are, the other companies will have FOMO factor. And they're going to say, if they're doing it, I better do it now. But I've been getting away with it for a little while.
And it's funny because it's very typically American solipsism that, you know, oh, the first potential female president. Would there have been female leaders in other countries in the world? It's not as big a deal outside of here, but of course we can always see beyond our little borders. But so I guess when we get back to culture, you guys touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into sort of hiring practices. You said, how do you create a culture? Because that's so much harder than, like you said, checking off boxes and hiring certain types of people. How do you change a culture, and how do you sort of get that ball rolling, I guess is a better way to put it.
I think it starts by starting and, you know, looking in the mirror and saying, what kind of company do I want to lead? And I think the best leaders inspire. And, you know, and I think that we need to inspire change. And we talk a lot about the unconscious bias training. But at the end of the day, if you have a male and a female, same, you know, skill sets, Harvard MBA, same backgrounds, ultimately, and I'm not even sure it's unconscious, you choose the guy because you say he's going to be able to travel all the time, work late hours, he's not going to have caregiving responsibility, you know, and that's what you assume. But if we start also profiling not just by gender, race, and age, but by type of leadership, type of talent, type of skill set, you might say for someone that wants to run a team of 200 people, you might want a more nurturing, collaborative leader, which, by the way, can be men as well. Men have feminine characteristics and vice versa. But maybe we need to really add a little longer list to how we profile, you know, responsibilities. And of course, there's the generic things that we talk about in job descriptions, not use, we're looking for an aggressive person, because men will tend to apply for that role and women won't. If we don't say salary negotiable, women won't negotiate their salary. So I think that there are some of the traditional things that we've been hearing about that are new ways of, you know, profiling job descriptions as well.
Just to that point, do you find that we're butting up against language problems that go back sort of almost in our DNA, this idea that, you know, the age-old story that a man is a strong leader, whereas a woman is bossy. You know, we always, even though they're doing the exact same job. I mean, is that, how do you get over that? Yeah, how do you get over that?
Absolutely there. Yeah. And it's about education. It's about calling people out for it. And I think that's not happening in organizations enough, that people aren't being called out for the language they're using. And, you know, we all have accountability for that.
Replace bossy with confident.
Yeah.
Confidence is beautiful.
Well, we're seeing it even in the election now. I mean, Hillary Clinton is very much a seasoned politician, and she's being sort of lambasted in a way that you wouldn't a male politician. She's doing things that are very political, but because she's a woman, it's seen as somehow odd or aggressive or weird or something. And again, it just seems like it's this mental switch that needs to be turned on for people to kind of stop seeing it in those terms. Yeah.
And I think a lot of us as parents have that responsibility in terms of how we talk to our children and educate them in terms of how they're seen in the world and the language that they use as well.
Yeah. That's what, now, just, I know we're getting up on our time here. I just want to talk about a little bit about sort of where are, I mean, we've touched on a lot of the blind spots, particularly in our industry. Where do you see sort of the next year? What are the sort of the mandates that we have to sort of, what are the first steps we have to take to really incite change within our industry?
For us, last year at the World Economic Forum, we started creating a landscape of where we're at, admiring the problem, but curating and collaborating, because there's so many studies that all say the same thing differently. And so we, indexed 27 conversations and put it into one package of advancing women in the workplace, like where we are, threshold. Next year at Davos, we'll start uncovering tips, tricks, and recommendations in a modern guide for equality to at least start introducing tools, toolkits for change, solutions in a step change process so we could start making progress. And then we'd love to just create equality boot camps inside of companies and start working together. And it's not scary if we are open-minded and willing to, understand where we are and where we want to go. But we have to have an open mind towards change.
And I think from my perspective, MEC has a talent ambition to change the face of talent management in the industry. And we're going to do that through some of the innovative approaches we've got to recruiting, to hiring, to developing people. So when Advertising Week comes along next month, we are going to be showing the industry how they can address bias issues and how they need to be a bit braver in those conversations. And we're not just going to do it as an Advertising Week event, it's going to be through our organization globally. And we want to show and demonstrate to people that there's a different way of doing things. And I think metrics are one thing, and we've talked about accountability. People need to be held accountable, but metrics aren't just everything. It's about that shift in behavior and cultural change that's going to really make the difference.
You had mentioned earlier social media, the role of social media, how a lot of times people focus on the fact that it brings the worst of humanity to the surface, but it also makes people a lot more visible, as you said before. It lets people get their work out there in ways that you never could before, and it gives people a platform to call out. Again, a lot of the reaction to the Olympics was, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? We need to change the conversation. So how do you get people to sort of embrace social media, the positive side, while accepting the fact that there's going to be some bile there as well?
Right.
Yeah.
I think the more we can dimensionalize the success of having equality in the workplace, the better it will be. I mean, there's so many business case successes of having men and women, and diversity, African American, Hispanic, all different kind of minds at the table, does show, how businesses do better and perform better. And I think if we can start not just talking about that there's an issue and that there's even tools, and start showing the business success of diversity, we will start moving forward as well, and using social for that.
And I think if you have an authentic culture that's actually living the values that you believe in, that social media will be an absolute tool for you, because your employees will be your advocates, and they'll talk about what it's really like. Because if you just have process in place, it's not going to come through as you changing and being a place that people want to spend their time.
Authenticity is a very important word.
Well, thank you both for being here. It's a great
It's my
conversation.
pleasure.
Like I said, there's a million roads we could probably go down, and we'll probably when the cameras are off. But thank you both for being here. I really
thank you.
appreciate it,
My pleasure.
and
Thank
thank
you so
everyone
much.
for watching.
Thank you, Advertising Week.
Thank you. Thank you, Advertising Week.